All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to a very special Mother's Day edition of the Deadly Analysis podcast. If you're new to this podcast, what we do here is we select well-made, often recent horror films and talk about why they scare us. One could say we get raw with each other as we open up and delve into our various fears. And tonight's film was my selection, which is the 2016 French horror film Raw. And it seems like we've been on kind of like a French film bender recently with Martyrs last week. We did Climax and some others. Not entirely sure why that is. One could say I can't exactly put my finger on why that is. So Raw, nothing like a good old-fashioned story of sisterly cannibalism to get the blood flowing. Am I right? Hey, by the way, what does a cannibal do after he dumps his girlfriend? Anybody know? He wipes his ass. So, Raw tells the story of Justine. Now, Justine is a first-year veterinary student, and her elder sister is studying the same course at the university. Justine was apparently raised in a very strict vegetarian diet growing up, but as part of the hazing ritual at this school, she's forced to eat meat. I think it's a rabbit kidney in the film. And this has adverse effects, let's say, eventually culminating in an insatiable craving for meat, particularly human flesh. So, great movie, great concept, very PG-esque, we can tell. So I chose this film, and I'm going to tell you why I absolutely love this horror movie. It's one of my favorites, in case you can't tell by Justine looking at me behind me over her. That's her right there. No, that's the witch. There we go. That's her right there. So look, I tend to gravitate towards horror films that have like one of three specific elements in them. They either force the viewer to consider their own finitude. So like, in other words, death as a concept, is a large part of the movie. I love horror movies that do that talk about those things, that make you think about those things. I gravitate towards familial horror films also. These are movies that often play with or even reverse what we commonly take to be our closest relationships, our family. But then I also enjoy horror movies that tell a story of becoming, like becoming a monster, becoming something other, transition, right? And transition is a large part of this horror film, and it's a large part of horror films that I enjoy. In fact, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, all of the three horror films behind me sort of have that element in it. The Witch, Let the Right One In, and Raw. There's a similar thread of adolescence, puberty, transition, a lot of stuff going on that's similar in these movies, although they're very different sorts of horror films. So I like Raw, though, specifically because it's one of the most extreme examples of transition. Like, what's more taboo than a person, becoming consumed with the eating of human flesh, or maybe even mixing sexual expression with the consumption of human flesh, which we see in this movie. It's sort of unthinkable, right? It's forbidden. It's taboo. And what this film does really well is, I think, is that it navigates the profane within the context of a person burgeoning sexually, right? Like, what's okay? What's off limits? This is all new, right? Like, how do I reconcile these strange new desires within the broader cultural context in which I find myself, right? There's a struggling with one's own nature in this movie. And I dig that. And it seems to be a fundamental part of this movie. And I think that's something, to far lesser extremes, we all experience at some point in our lives. As I've said previously, I think good horror films, regardless of the subgenre, take very basic components of the human experience and then very eloquently shroud them in layers of fear, right? They cloak very fundamental components of the human experience in a good, scary story. Good horror films to me ask fundamental questions. That's at the core of a quality horror movie that's going to last and be remembered. And to me, this is one of those films that has that. And then with strictly within the confines of traditional horror, this is probably the only body horror film that I really get something out of. That's typically not my thing. There are things in this movie that just gross me the fuck out. You think they gross me out? Wait till we get to Jim. All right, that's all I'm going to say. There's just things in this movie that are absolutely disgusting. Close-ups of skin being peeled, the nibbling of severed fingers, drinking blood, ripping off of pubic hair. It's what I suspect we're all going to be doing when we finally hang out in person. All of the Deadly Analysis co-hosts. Yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Jim, when we meet, save the pubic hair because it's coming off. Like when we meet, it's being ripped off. So save it. Just gonna throw that out there. This is again one of those situations where I don't know how to segue out of Jim's pubic hair. I feel like that always comes up and I don't know how to segue out of that. Story of my life. In any event, so like to put somewhat of a personal spin on this, Jim did this a little bit with his film Annihilation. I kind of want to do that too. I'll start by kind of doing that a little bit after we talk about pubic hair. This is a weird podcast. I don't know how we even get away with this. So I know that I've probably talked about this to death elsewhere, but there was a time in my life when I was very religious, right? Like I was contemplating seminary and I was looking into philosophy and theology programs. I taught apologetics at church. I led Bible studies. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I waited till I was married to have sex. I was very, very straight edge. And I thought that I had a real grasp on the world and my place in it, right? That was my vegetarianism. That was my veterinary school, as it were, right? And then because reasons, I'll leave it at that, I lost my faith. I became a nihilist, the nihilist, antinatalist, pro-mortalist, atheist heathen that you see before you today. And in that transition, especially since I had to keep it all in for a very long time, I couldn't tell this to my family or really even my wife for a while. There was a sense in which I had this very real internal struggle that would I have to come clean about to the community I was a part of would have been profane and forbidden and taboo, right? Like to my community, to my peers, to my family, and to my friends who are all evangelicals, to tell them I no longer believed in God was tantamount to a huge social taboo. It's a very wicked thing. It's not cannibalism per se, right? But, the desire to be who I think I really am, right? And, then all of these things that I once considered to be vices, bad things, sinful things, I had to sort of reconsider for myself without the narrative of Christianity, right? I had to sort of find my own ethics and reassess the straight edgery that I once dedicated myself to. And since then, I've noticed like in myself an appreciation for movies that offer me a very large journey, like a really violent journey where the Band-Aid gets ripped off, as it were. At one point you were way over here, and then suddenly by the end of the movie, the protagonist is all the way over here. And this is one of those movies, right? Like at the beginning of this movie, Justine is a virgin. She's a vegetarian. And by the end, she's a cannibal who bites off human flesh while she's fucking people. Like huge transition, guys. Huge transition, right? So I like the idea of radical self-realization, right? And transition, even at the expense of everything you hold dear, even at the expense of social social mores, I guess, even if it's wildly profane and vice-ridden and taboo, and that is raw. That's raw to me. So that's sort of my little opening spiel. What did you guys think of the movie? I suspect that this may be a fairly polarizing movie to us. I'm really curious to know what you guys think. I could be wrong. But look, anything's better than Martyrs last week, so who the fuck knows? What did you guys, like, just general thoughts? What did you guys think of Raw? Did anyone eat while they were watching it? Looking at you, Jim. Looking at you.
I did. It was a horrible mistake. It was awful. Yeah, the first time I saw this when it came out, not long after it came out, when it came out on streaming, and you had recommended it, and I always watch movies while I eat. It's just kind of it's my normal thing. And when she bit into the raw chicken breast, that was, I think, the first time I gagged and almost vomited. And then when she eats her sister's finger, that got me both times. I literally, lunch came up. So it's just one of my triggers, like non-food things or even like semi-food things entering the mouth. And then when she pulls the hair out of her, that got me both times as well. Both times I've watched this movie, that caused me to gag. And so
keep going. You're turning me on.
I'm so happy that's one of your kinks. No, you should really get that looked at. But so that's it. You're right. I've got to. For me, the struggle about this film is balancing its objective quality versus my subjective experience with it. I know that my reactions to this movie are primarily as a result of sort of an idiosyncratic um, disgust at watching mouth shit. And that's essentially what this is. So I've got to balance the idiosyncratic reaction to that versus the objective quality. And so I think objectively the film is good. It's a strong metaphorical actually, my complaints with the film have to do with its metaphorical representation of sex and sexuality, but it's doing a metaphor fairly competently, and it's got a good character story, something that we could take literally and see a character's journey over the course of, as you articulated, over the course of the film. So I think objectively it's quite good, in addition to serving to trigger my gag reflex, which is
I'm
not always
curious how
present.
the disgust adds to your rating or takes it away. Like you separated the idea of like what it viscerally did to you physically when you were watching it, but I'm curious if that becomes part. Like, is that a pro? Is that a good thing when you watch a horror movie that it does this to you? Like, or like did that weigh heavily, or just you're separating it entirely?
I am trying to separate it entirely. Let's put it this way: I don't ever want to watch this movie again. So that's, in terms of rewatchability, this is a 0 on a 10 scale. I would not want to watch this movie ever again. Same thing with Antichrist. So both of those films I saw twice just because of this podcast. So fuck you again. I don't want to watch it again, and so that I am trying to separate it because I don't think it's fair to the film to say this film disgusts me and therefore it's a 1 out of 5. Like that's not fair to the film, and it's not fair to our viewers, and it's not fair to you. It's not fair to anybody. And this is a type of visceral disgust that I don't necessarily want to explore or necessarily want to invite, because it is simply just my stomach churning. That's not the informative type of fear that we're talking about on this podcast. That's just it's the same reason that I won't watch Pink Flamingos. You know, she eats a piece of shit, and I don't want to. Why would I want to watch that? I don't want to watch that. So it's not fair to it's not fair to the art form to have my personal disgust enter into my rating.
Well, I was gonna ask you what rating you gave to Two Girls, One Cup, but now I know. So
yeah, I've never seen that. I have no desire to watch that.
I don't suggest it at all.
I have no. Why would I do that? That's not.
It would probably be higher than The Lobster, though. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud. Anyway,
I don't think that's a thing.
You're right, though. It's an equivalent to that. Viscerality is the equivalent to a kind of knee-jerk reaction to jump in a movie. You know what I mean? Like it happens to you in that sense.
It's a jump scare, which is it's the equivalent of a jump scare, and jump scares are cheap unless they're used strategically within the film to modify how tension gets built. But as a whole, it's not a. I think that we'll spend this amount of time talking about it, and then I'll try to avoid my own visceral reaction to this movie throughout the rest of it, because it is fundamental to how I interacted with the movie, but it shouldn't be fundamental to how I review the film.
So I kind of want to weigh in on that a little bit. I think last time, whenever we did Martyrs, this is actually quite apropos, because I made the argument that the movie had to be analyzed and sort of rated as a whole, as opposed to breaking up into different pieces that are either good or not good. But I do like this distinction you're making. I do think it's interesting, and I do really think it's informative, because those types of like elements in films that we do have extreme visceral reactions to, obviously everyone is kind of on a sliding scale as to how potent those are. And I think sometimes essentially having those in a film for a particular person can be like, you can't really taste the coffee for the cream and the sugar. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just a little overwhelming for that particular person. So there is a distinction that has to be made there, and I think it's important to really talk about that. Like, here's this part that evokes these things for me, and it's pretty common for horror films, but then here's all the other stuff going on. But I would argue that at the end of the day, I don't know, like, I'm still all about the package deal, I'll say.
Yeah, I see like what you guys are getting at too with the martyrs and the raw. Like, I think it is important to bring these things up because we just discussed this body horror stuff and was it necessary? And I guess the argument could be made that in Martyrs it was necessary to have all that mutilation because when they watered it down, it was really lame. But then does that mean that it's necessary? Not necessarily, right? And so, like, does it fit in with storyline? Does it fit in with the beginning, middle, and end? Does the beginning, middle, and end fit together properly? Like, these are the ways to assess these things. And at the end of the day, her eating raw chicken, her coughing up hair, I had no reaction from that. But I also worked at a vet clinic for 2 years, and I worked at a preschool for 4 years. And I've seen a lot of disgusting stuff, so it didn't affect me. I've seen, giant cysts opened up on a dog and all this stuff, like pus and blood and stuff spilling out. I've had to rip stuff out of people's throats. I've had to cut things open. I've had to deal with cadavers of dead loved ones. Like I've dealt with all different kinds of the stuff that makes people's skin crawl and I guess those kinds of things just don't have that effect on me. I remember when I first started working at the vet clinic, though, I remember puking a couple of times. it definitely happened, but eventually, like, okay, yeah. You cut open animals, and you just get used to the smell and the look,
That's what's odd and idiosyncratic about this, though, is I worked as a paramedic for 2 years and I've seen all kinds of awful body horror shit, man versus train at one stage. And that didn't really get to me. Like I didn't have the same visceral reaction. It's only like she's eating her hair or taking her hair out of her mouth. Like that's what gets me. You said in the chat like somebody was eating pizza or something, and it's like we should have you eat in front of that would just make me want to have some of the pizza, except I'm a pescatarian, so I won't eat the meat on the pizza. So like it's just this weird kind of non-food items going into the mouth that it's a weird thing that's what my trigger is.
That's very interesting.
But yeah, I mean, I guess going back to what you were saying, Ben, are you saying that I should include my disgust in my overall rating of the film? Because if so, I don't think that'll make Noah very happy.
I think that you should work it into how you rate the film in a reasonable way. So here's the distinction I make. And I worked at a veterinary clinic for like a year too. So maybe that's why I don't have like that same visceral reaction. But the distinction I'm going to make between like the weird body horror stuff in this movie versus like Martyrs, for instance, is that I feel like in this movie, you could take it and it's interesting. And it's like, I feel like it's well done. I don't know. It's interesting for the movie, but it could also be taken as a metaphor. Like it really doesn't necessarily have to literally be cannibalism if you don't want it to. And because of that, I think it's more interesting than just having cannibalism for cannibalism's sake. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the mark of a good zombie film almost. It's like, are you having the undead come back to life to eat people because it's icky, or because it says something a little deeper about like a social commentary or some kind of like sickness that we have as like a populace, or like, I don't know, like group mentalities or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, it really just kind of like depends on how it's used. And in this movie, I think they used, once again, that violent element for a really interesting thematic story-based purpose.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the metaphorical interpretation of this film is a little bit. I have a little bit of questions about it, but I think that that's where the film, there's some strengths to the movie making, and you can certainly tell that this has a uh, a, a strong voice, both as a writer, as a director, and all the artists involved. It works really well. Um, I just have this idiosyncratic thing that when somebody's pulling hair out of their mouth, I vomit my lunch. So fun. But yeah, let's kind of talk since we sort of skirted around this metaphorical interpretation a little bit. Let's kind of talk about this. Noah, you were I think you're right when you talk about this as a metaphor for sexuality. And how she discovers her appetites, both literal as they relate to flesh and meat, and uh, discovers her desire for sex as well. That, but doesn't that I think that's the correct metaphorical interpretation of this thing. But then by equating sex to cannibalism, not only are you dealing with some of the things that you spoke about how within certain communities sex and sexuality is taboo, but you're also like cannibalism is not something that she enjoys. She's not happy about being a cannibal. She's not happy about like that's not, it may be a becoming, but it's a becoming that she is actively resisting throughout the entire action of this film, even though her appetites do overtake her. So doesn't that take a very what's the opposite of positive, sex negative view of sex and sexuality? I mean, isn't that kind of what this film is exploring?
Can I weigh in a little bit on my perspective on this?
Yeah.
I think it has to do with the repression, maybe. The fact that the parents raised her as a vegetarian and to like spit out her food if she likes meat and all that stuff. And one of the things that I discovered from my transition of a very fundamentalist household to being the person I am today is having parents that are constantly telling you, no, don't do this. It makes you a lot more carnal and crazy with some of your life choices, and maybe makes you do something that you wouldn't normally even be drawn to do, except for now it's like a form of rebellion. Maybe that's part of it, triggering you when you're, in the teenage years, but also maybe just the taboo now. It's like, ooh, this is naughty. I'm being naughty. Ooh, I don't know. Like, there's got to be those kinds of things bubbling to the surface here.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot going on here, right? So to hop on your note, Shayra, real quick, there's a sense in which asceticism, like denying oneself particular things, only doubles down the desire for those things. Right? It's again, something very Nietzschean. But and that is, you can definitely draw that from this movie. To answer your question, Jim, I don't think it's a sex and negative movie in the sense that we're being given a woman's confrontation with her own sexuality. They're showing a struggle, right? And I think it actually, so I gotta be careful how I say this, I think this movie is actually a layer deeper than sexuality. I think that's a huge part of the movie, but I think underneath that is something even more fundamental than burgeoning into being a sexual person, and that is maybe confronting one's own nature and things that one sees in a sexual context, sure, that one does not like about oneself. So carnality, right? Like there's a lot of mirrors in this movie, right? Like looking back at oneself. The primary tool and thing we see all over this movie is autopsy. Autopsy of dogs, autopsy of different animals. There's a cutting open, looking inside element in Raw. So it's the movie is saying look inward, right? And it's to that extent, it's larger than just sexuality. Think of the scene where she walks into that room and she gets paint thrown on her. I think she has blue paint, and someone else has yellow paint, right? And there's a quote, I think I wrote it down here, where where is it? Don't come back until you're green.
Don't come back till you're green.
and which the idea is you have these two conflicting components to yourself. Don't come back until you reconcile them. One's blue, one's yellow. Mix them. Come out of that. Don't come out of that room until there's reconciliation, right? So, like, there's a lot of that all over this movie. There's a lot of inside stuff going on. So, I think to answer your question, the film is showing us a struggle, like an internal struggle with this woman's sexuality and being a virgin and desire and carnality. There's a lot going on here, a lot sexual, but a lot that even exists outside of sexuality. So I want to say it's maybe a layer deeper than sexuality. I certainly don't think it's sex negative at all. So I think it's just I think to answer your question, it's just highlighting a struggle, like an internal struggle that our character is having. And then we should probably think of how the movie ends. Actually, you know what?
Where I was going to go next.
Yeah, because the ending may be one of the interesting ways to counter my interpretation of this movie. I think I kind of want to hold off before we get there, but I mentioned this earlier. Think of the mirror scene in this movie. Ben knows this because I've posted it a million times on like my Facebook, but this is like one of my favorite scenes. The scene where she's dancing in front of the mirror to that like horrible song. That is one of my favorite scenes in any horror film ever made. I love that scene. And just prior to that scene, I don't know if you noticed this, the camera slowly pans into like a dead dog on an autopsy table in which the covering that was on top of the dog just sort of falls off. I don't know if it's the wind or whatever, but you get to see like the grotesque horror of what lies beneath the sheet, as it were, right? This mangled dead dog. And in much the same way, the camera will then fade into Justine dancing in front of that mirror. And the idea is like the sheet is about to come off for her too, right? Like there's, she's there seducing herself in the mirror. Again, a mirror being a tool of reflection, seeing oneself. And she's dancing to the most obscene and aberrant song one can imagine, right? Like the lyrics are about fucking corpses and coke and anthrax and edging blowjobs and like all manner of sick shit that you can fit into 2 minutes. It's a vile song that mixes different types of carnality into like one singular ethos. One that Justine dances to, as it were, right? It's very metaphorical here. And that's the point, right? The point is reconciling all the sick shit you have inside of you, right? It may be sans sexuality, maybe deeper than sexuality, like looking into the mirror and learning to dance to those things, right? There's an embracing component here. Maybe, and this is maybe where we'll disagree about the message of this movie, right? But I think we can at least agree there's a transformation of sorts here, right? Like for Justine, this is the scene, the mirror scene, where she finally decides to give in to the something other, right? In this case, being a cannibal, essentially, right? Like who she is before this scene and who she is after are two very different people. And I like the idea, although it's somewhat heavy-handed in the movie, that the line of demarcation was the mirror, right? Like looking at oneself and dancing to one's own darkness. And, although I don't personally condone cannibalism, I know that may be hard to believe. If there is any normative component I'm a fan of here, it's like the journey inward, right? And the potential to come out the other side as something radically different in virtue of accepting something you previously couldn't about yourself, right? In this movie, it's cannibalism, but I think the social payoff here may be that people journey inward and come out on the other side gay or an atheist or trans or any other manner of like radical conversion to what they once used to be, what they once took to be very fearful or vice-ridden, right, and taboo. So that's why I love this scene, right? Like so I think that answers your question. Like it may be something a little more expansive than just sexuality.
It does, but I don't see embracing in this movie. I see resisting. I see a descent that is resisted, and even in the final shot of the film, in the final moment of the film, we hope that you can find a solution to this.
That's embracing. That's embracing. Like he's like, look, I live with your mom. I'm still married to her. We make it work. Here's all my scars. To me, that's an embrace. This is who you are. Here's what happens when you're with someone to which this is the carnality you have inside you. We've made it work. I hope you can make it work too. It's not like we need to lock you up too, because you're well, I need to take my wife because she's a cannibal, and I need to take her daughters because they're cannibals and lock them away. It's we hope you can make it work. Like, that is literally what people hear when they come out as gay. Like, hey, look, we love you, make it work. Like, this is who you are, right? That's, to me, an embrace. It's not a denial. It's an acceptance. I took that to be a radical acceptance.
I took that to be him revealing himself to be it. See, I read the scene completely opposite as that you did.
Okay.
I don't see him. His face is clearly horrified, and that's meant to be a shocking moment. That's meant to be a moment that we're to read as, oh shit, she's got what her mother has. And it becomes this almost disease that got passed down from mother to daughter. And his monologue before that is not like, oh yeah, then I realized that she was gay, and so that now we just have to make it work. Like, I realized that she likes to eat me, and we still somehow made it work, and we tried this thing of making you vegans throughout your entire childhood, and that didn't work. Your desires still sort of burst through. We tried that. Maybe you can find a solution, meaning maybe you can stop eating people.
Wow, we took this very differently.
Yeah, that was my reading of this. And maybe I need to go back and look at the text again, but that's how I read the ending. And I don't know
what did you guys think? That's interesting.
Could we look at this more of like a subtext thing? Because one of the things that I love about the dialogue of Quentin Tarantino films is they'll be talking about something that seems completely unrelated to the actions that are going on around you, because there's some kind of a subtext underlying it. Like in Inglourious Bastards, when he's sitting there talking to the Nazi dude, and he's talking about rats in the floorboards and stuff like that. He's talking about vermin, but we know that the underlying subtext is that he's talking about Jewish people. And there's some real power when you look at that subtext. So we have to try to figure out what the subtext of the cannibalism is, and figure out what they're trying to imply. And like, in my mind, I think it has possibly something to do with sure, instincts and maybe some like carnal stuff, but it could also have to do with, mental health issues, or possibly hurting and harming others around you when you have those mental health issues, including your family members, including your partners. And maybe it was passed on to the kids, and that could be a very traumatic thing. I know a lot of parents get concerned about that. This is one of the reasons why my husband doesn't want to have children, because he doesn't want to pass on any, issues through his DNA. So, I mean, it could have something to do with, those kinds of things. I mean, I'm not sure what you guys have read into what the subtext is, though. I mean, there's so many possibilities.
Well, what do you think specifically, Cher? I'm curious. What do you think about the end? Is there an embracing and acceptance of Justine's cannibalism, or is it more positive or negative? I guess that's sort of being like what Jim and I are asking. Is it more of an acceptance?
I guess I have a very different view than both of you then. I don't see it as like, yay, this is fine, we got to embrace stuff, we got to move through, or even a negative, like, this is just horrible that I'm in this feared place. It's, life sucks. And we fall in love with people, and we have our connections with people, and sometimes things can hurt you. And just like, he was just hoping
so it's more
that
utility.
she could find her path.
So it's more utility.
He was like, I hope that you figure this out.
Yeah, it's more make it work. It's sort of benign, make it work, utility sort of. Interesting.
It seemed very utilitarian. And I mean, honestly, we all live through pain. We all struggle with parts of life. We all go through stuff. This is probably just more of a physical manifestation of the scars that we deal with, sometimes from interpersonal relationships and things like that. So, I mean, he's basically saying, yeah, I have the scars. We've managed to figure out how to make it work. And I'm guessing that has something to do with trying to be vegetarian. But maybe repression isn't the thing that works, and maybe they need to figure out a new path. Maybe he's like, I hope you figure out a path. You know, like this worked for mom, but maybe it won't work for you. I don't know.
You're the tiebreaker, Ben. You're the
Yeah, no,
you're the
I think actually I kind of agree with all of you. I don't think the viewpoints you have are as contentious as they might seem on the surface. So I do think that even just thinking about the end of the movie in the context of the beginning. In the very beginning of the movie, of course, Justine is with her parents and they take her to the university and they're in that parking lot and they drop her off and drive away. I think that's a fantastic way to start the film because it's really sort of a good way to summarize, I think, what happens to all of us at some point in our lives, or maybe most of us. There is this point when you sort of break into kind of like adulthood mode. It happens at some point to everyone. It's not clear in the same kind of demarcation like you might see in a film when it happens, but it happens. And when that happens, there's a lot of new stuff in the world and a lot of new stuff about ourselves that suddenly we are exposed to and we learn about. And I do agree that, in this film, I think there are many layers that could be taken here, but I don't necessarily see it as like a specific subtext or, obviously in this particular journey, there's a lot about like social relationships. There's a lot about psychology, but it can almost be taken as a kaleidoscope where you can sort of replace those things with any of the impulses that we learn that we have as we become familiar with ourselves as like fully formed adults. There's lots of stuff. It's kind of a Pandora's box. You never really know what you're going to get when you look inside of it, when you start like having to control yourself and sort of reconciling all of your own demons, as opposed to living in the household of your parents where they can kind of like control that for you, right? Like all the stuff starts to bubble up to the surface. You have to learn how to deal with that. You have to learn how to figure it out and make amends yourself, because nobody's going to be able to do that for you as an adult. Like obviously your parents eventually go away. No friend, no matter how close they are, can really like keep that in control as well as you can if you just learn to be kind of like a person who can regulate that in like a healthy way, or maybe it's an unhealthy way. But at the end of the movie, I do think that it was as healthy as it possibly can be. Yes, it was positive because like, here's this solution, here's this reconciliation, this problem exists, you're not alone, here's how we learned how to deal with it. It's super depressing and fucked up because the solution is imperfect, which is quite realistic. You know what I mean? Like we all have our problems and weird shit that comes up. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean you're magically a genius. All of us are just out here kind of doing the best we can. And like their solution was sad and fucked up because as Shayra said, that's kind of how life is. You know what I mean? So it's an incredibly realistic, honest look, I think, about that transition where it doesn't end in complete tragedy. It doesn't end in rainbows and sunshine. It's just kind of like this thing where it's like, yes, there's this problem. You've changed. You've learned things about yourself. If you want to keep functioning as an adult in the world, you have to learn how to deal with that in such a way that it doesn't explode and cause you to be completely unstable and destructive to yourself and others.
I just heard that we were all right. That's all I need to hear. We're all
Wait,
right.
what?
Ben agrees that each and every single one of us.
Yeah. So it's,
how about that? Take that.
we had a either or problem, and both of you said both.
yeah.
So,
yeah. Both and.
Trying to search for the father's monologue, and the closest I've been able to find is IMDb, and it just says your mom was tough at first, kept saying I was her best friend at school, drove me nuts, sort of like a friend zone kind of thing. It's not like she had a boyfriend, just me, and then we had our first kiss and I understood. And that's when he sort of takes off his shirt. So he's sort of, and then I understood what she was. I don't see this as an embracing and.
Well, why didn't he leave? He embraced it. He said, I understood what she was. Look at all these scars, bam, I'm still here. I'm married to your mom. I know you're like this. I know your sister's like this. Of course that's an embrace to me. It's if we're talking about him, especially him, it's certainly an embrace. He could have left. He didn't leave. Why did he leave? He's there. He's digging it.
He's literal man meat.
Yeah, he likes being man meat, Jim. Some of us like being man meat,
Well, we can talk about how all the men in this film are emasculated, which I'm fine with. I'm not saying that is a negative on the movie. As another point that I was going to bring up about how all of the men are emasculated in this really feminist film, and we could play with those topics later. But I'm still trying to. The fact that we have such radically different understandings of this ending, and still both, I think, came down positive on this film is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. I'm
mean,
kind
I
of
am
scared that I'm the
directed-
only one who saw the ending as positive. I'm thinking I may be a little more sick than the rest of you.
I don't think it's like necessarily like, honestly, the idea of pursuing happiness is like very strange concept to me. I like to do things that make me happy, but I understand that happiness is temporary. But usually in that pursuit, and usually in that desire to reach those little moments, you kind of have to deal with some bullshit, and that's just part of the fucked up part of life. He obviously loves his wife. He was pursuing her heavily. He loves his daughters. He's a little scared for them, but I mean, it was his way of being like, hey, if the rest of the world doesn't accept you, I can accept you, okay? Like, you have your dad. Your dad is going to be cool with who you are. And that's huge. Like, that is something that not every kid gets. Not every kid gets parents that are accepting of who you are and are going to be like, hey, yeah, life is going to suck, and hopefully you find a solution, but I'm not going to be able to judge you for this. So I guess that's the only positive thing I can take from it, is that she actually has a parent that will accept her for who she is. Not everyone could say that.
Net positive gain there at the end. Yep. Acceptance, embrace, etc. I feel like Jim's just going to open up his suit and just be like, you know what, guys, I agree. And
Yeah,
just have scars.
actually.
It's like,
That was 100% what I was going to do.
Yeah, big old deadly analysis tattoo sprawled across
That's
his
our way of
chest.
saying unbutton it. Come on, let's go.
Yeah. Give us a little bit, Jim. Jesus, we've been asking for it for months.
I didn't know this was that kind of podcast.
Yeah, wait till Cam next week. Jesus.
Yeah, right.
Keep it in your pants. Yeah, well, I'm talking to myself, apparently.
I don't know. I think that so look, as soon as you make the intellectual jump that causes you to relate the metaphor of cannibalism in this film to the repression of homosexuality, or repression as it relates to religious identity, or as it relates to sexual identity, or as it relates to any other form of difference that the well-meaning, forwardly thinking progressive liberals would agree are appropriate lifestyle choices. As soon as you make the intellectual leap that says cannibalism equals those things within the context of this film, then you're preloading your own intellectual interpretation of this film to think about the ending as positive, right?
Well, no, I mean, it could have. I don't think so, because it could have been that at the end, both of them end up in an asylum, not just one. The movie could have been giving us a very obvious net negative, happening at the end of this movie. It could be the case that Justine goes to jail, or she dies, or her sister gets hit by a car, or there's so many ways. I feel like the movie is saying, it's not me. The movie is saying there's an acceptance of this thing, and it doesn't have to be liberal stuff. You can come out a conservative for all I fucking care. The point is, it's a transitional thing that's happening to this person through, I want to say it's post-adolescence, but it's a person coming to into their own through the vehicle of sexuality. But it's very vague. Like I said, it could be any of these things. It's really just a movie about transition at the end of the day. And transition often happens when you're young. It happens when you're going through college. It happens at around that time. So the movie's using it as a vehicle, but it doesn't have to be liberal, like-minded things. It could be like fucking right-wing shit. It could be coming out. It basically, whatever culture you're like. Okay, when I was a Christian, I was in the Bible Belt. It was like, and I was a conservative when I was a Christian. When I became an atheist, I was still a conservative. I was a Republican when I was an atheist for a long time. So I was surrounded so it's really the context, right? It's really like your society, which can be radically different from place to place. So I don't think it has to do necessarily with me reading my own thing. I think the movie is telling us it's about transition and about the struggle for transition. So let's maybe take a step back and make it more vague, make it more generalized. This is a movie about transitioning and the internal struggle one has when looking at themselves in the mirror and going, I am changing. this is a big change, and this change does not align with the society to which I am a part of. And this is the most extreme example of this in this movie. That's why I brought up in my intro. Cannibalism is one of the biggest taboos there is. Eating another person this is why when Alive came out, it's not even a horror film and people refused to see it. It was controversial. It was nuts because people were eating other people. So it takes the most extreme example just as a tool to utilize, but really at the end of the day, it's about transitioning and changing in a very large roundabout way, and the struggle one has when they come out that other side. And fill in the blank, dude. It doesn't have to be being liberal. It could be being conservative. It could be coming out.
Sure.
It could be anything.
Yeah, sure. I think we agree that it's a film about transition. I read that transition as sexual awakening. And I think where we disagree is how the film treats transition as a positive or negative experience, and how it, especially as it relates to sexuality, if we're going to make the one-to-one comparison between cannibalism and sexual awakening, then the film becomes a sex negative film, which has its issues. So just to sort of go back.
But why do you think that? Well, I want to pick
ahead.
that one thought apart. Why do you think that tying it to cannibalism makes it essentially sex negative? Is it because cannibalism is bad? Cannibalism is taboo? And if it's a movie that's about sexual awakening that's tied to something taboo, it's net sexually negative? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that if you're going to make, half of what you're saying is what I'm saying, and that half is if we're going to tie sexual awakening and sexuality to cannibalism, and cannibalism as portrayed in the movie is going to be as raw and negative and upsetting and disgusting and result in the incarceration of one character, the death of another character, then and the, I would say, relatively unhappy marriage of the parents.
Unhappy? On what basis are they unhappy?
That father is miserable.
No way. No way.
Not a pleased human being.
Then he can leave. He's not unhappy.
About how having daughters is so tough, and as he's giving his daughters.
Show me a dad that has two daughters who are in college who hasn't
normalizing his.
Well, that's it doesn't mean one's unhappy. Like being stressed out about having daughters that are drama ridden, like that's a normal part of being a father. It seems to me. He doesn't seem
drama ridden. They're eating each other.
Okay, so like deep drama, powerful drama.
Wait, how about this?
Two daughters, they always eat each other. That's how it happens.
But how about this? If we're gonna go to the sex, stuff, okay? Let's go into the sex stuff. If it is about sex, right? Nope. Dad is wanting their daughter to get to that age where they're going around having sex, and they especially are going to be concerned if that sex is starting with their sister. That's a little weird. You're gonna be like, like, I'm concerned where this is going. I hope you figure this out. But then maybe in a way he's like, I'm into some kinky shit too. I can't really judge. Hopefully you figure your life out. I try to keep you from the sex, but obviously you've gotten to the age of sex, and I just have to deal with this shit because I have no room to talk because I'm into that
he
too.
has no room to talk because he's happy. Like he could leave, but he doesn't. He stays with his wife despite all his scars, and that is because he is not. If it was that bad, he would leave. I'm gonna go back to that. If it really is negative, if it's super negative and terrible, he would get the fuck out of there. His life's
not necessarily. There's a lot of people that stay in really shitty toxic relationships, even though they shouldn't. So
that's
it's
true.
Not necessarily.
That's true.
Maybe he's eventually gonna escape, and we can get into Raw 2 when Dad escapes all the cannibalism.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I think you guys are just kink shaming. Like, I really do think he's probably just a sub. He's probably into it. It's okay. You're overreacting. They have a safe word. It's fine. God, guys, jeez. Be a little more accepting of people's stuff.
What's the safe word? Bon appetit? What? All right. Well, we probably belabored this point at this point. I understand. I, I understand your point of view, Noah. You understand my point of view.
That's true. One thing I think we can agree on, though, is that the movie, I think, well, maybe we're not going to agree. The movie does a good job of showing the transition of curiosity. So we mentioned some of these already, but like the scene, I think the first scene where something's really amiss is when she goes into the fridge and starts eating. You called it chicken. I thought it was fish, but you may be right that it was chicken, like raw chicken.
I thought it was
right?
a raw chicken.
For some reason, I thought it was fish. That's strange to me. I thought she was eating, but it's okay. So she goes from raw chicken to the severed finger of her sister. By the way, the music changes. The aura of the film cinematically, the music changes heavily.
First, she steals a hamburger.
Oh,
she
yes.
steals a hamburger.
Right.
She gets caught for it.
You're
and
right.
then she throws the hamburger away. And then her friend takes her to eat shawarma, I think.
You're right.
And so she tries to eat cooked meat at first, and then it becomes raw chicken, and then her sister's finger, and then herself.
Yeah.
Either the hair or her own tooth, etc.
Well, and then by the end, when her and her sister have that big spat and they end up biting each other and they're just sort of like locked on each other like rabid dogs, the transition has been complete, right? It's like, I liked how the movie took you there. Like you get to see the transition, I think, in a way that's very static.
I agree.
Yeah, I thought that was done well. Maybe compared to others, some other cannibal films. I'm thinking the only other one I really like is Ravenous, but I think this movie does it a little better in sort of the cannibal stuff. to talk about that, I'm actually getting the more we talk about cannibalism, the more I'm thinking about it, I'm actually kind of getting nauseated, which is weird because when I watched the movie, I didn't. This is really strange. But
right, well then let's go into a really interesting question.
Okay.
Why do you think the filmmaker had the dog sniffing her crotch when she was getting some work done?
That's quote of the night. Why did the director have the dog sniffing her crotch when she was getting work done? Quote of the night on Deadly Analysis. So I would answer it to say that this movie tries its best to put a magnifying glass to the viewer's uncomfortability. It takes very segmented slivers of things that, for the most part, if you were to describe them in text, would be normal. Hey, I'm getting a Brazilian. Okay, like that's not my thing, but I know women do that. I know men do that. I know people get a Brazilian. I know, look, my dogs, when they meet someone new, one of the first things they'll do is, if you're sitting down, they did this to Rob when he came and visited earlier. They go right for the dick. They go right for the crotch and they start smelling. Like, you put these on paper, they seem like normal things, but to watch them and to be filmed in a certain way puts a magnifying glass on sort of the awkwardness and uncomfortability. I think of the transition you see when you're becoming a sexual person. There's a smell down there, right? A dog smells those things. And so it's not abnormal for a dog to go, hey, what's that? And look, right? And she knocks the dog away, right? But the weirdness of that one moment is the same weirdness when my dog comes up to you and starts smelling your crotch. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, buddy, I'm up here. Right? Like, but that's good filmmaking, is to take that one weird little moment, draw it out, and make you go, oh, dude, what the fuck? Right? Like that's hard to do. Like that's, I think, what this movie is doing is it's taking things that, maybe we could put it this way. It's taking things that are normal, just not necessarily abnormal. Some things, getting your hair ripped off and dogs sniffing crotches, these are normal things, but it makes you walk away going, I really did not want to watch that. I did not want to see that. And I think that's the point largely in this movie, is to make you uncomfortable. Right. So I think that's why that's in there. And it's very, it's just awesome filmmaking, Yeah.
So
that's
then
the only time.
Wouldn't that be a testament to the idea that like the story is that real life really sucks, growing up really sucks, adulthood really sucks, and maybe
it's awkward. There's these transition things that are awkward. There's these sexual things that are strange and different and weird and awkward, and that can lead to fucking really odd occurrences. You know what I mean? Like stories that you look back and tell. You know what I mean? Like there's a first time for everything, and this movie, I think, takes some of those first time for everythings and puts a magnifying glass to it and makes you want to go, oh God, I don't ever want to see that again. Like what it's Jim's thing with this movie. He never wants to watch this movie again. Well, I think that to some extent is why I like the movie. I got to be careful because that's actually some of my criticism in other movies too. So I don't know if I'm being a super hypocrite here. I mean, that's why I don't like some of the torture porn movies that are out there, like Saw. But I don't feel like that's the entirety of this movie. That's not even the main aim. There's something high-minded, I guess we would say, about this movie. And it just so happens to take mundane components of human expression and sexuality and make you feel really awkward about it and grossed out about it, you know? That would be my answer. That's my long-winded answer. Anyway, anyone in the mood for some hair? Jesus, that sounds so good right now. Sounds so good. We got a guy in the chat. He's, I think it's Alejandro or Alex, ordered a pizza. Get some hair on that pizza, dude. Throw some hair on that shit. Chow down. Sounds so good.
It's disgusting. It's gross. Do you want to talk about gender a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. All of the men in this film are pretty emasculated. Like the father figure, I know we have different readings about that character, but he seems rather ineffectual, not doing much to affect the plot. The other male character, Adrian, I believe is his name. Yeah, Adrian. He is, he's forced into a situation, a sexual experience with Justine that he does not want to be a part of. And his agency ends up getting reduced to her agency. And then, of course, he becomes thinner. So the placing of agency is all in the female characters of this film, which I found to be a really interesting feminist choice behind the movie. And I thought that how gender was explored in this film, gender relations were explored in this film, was actually really interesting as well.
Adrian also got penetrated before he got eaten. So,
quite literally, yes.
It's like a rotisserie, a kebab.
An Adrian kebab, one could say. Yummy. Yeah,
there's one counterexample of that. I do want to point this out too. So those are interesting examples. I'm trying to find the overall theme. It didn't really stand out to me as such whenever I was watching it. So I'm thinking a little bit about it now. The counterexample that I have is the male teacher who is thoroughly unimpressed with the skills of Justine. And he gives her shit about her paper. He goes through this entire spiel about he has no sympathy for really, really good students who just kind of coast through. And he would rather see her ranking fall as opposed to, I presume, Adrian's, because he's talking about her friend who may or may not have cheated on the paper, like somebody cheated, right? So I really do feel like in that particular case, this one individual is kind of like taking no shit and obviously has a little bit of control in that situation. So yeah, that's fair. You know what I mean? So I'm like, yeah. And honestly, like I'm thinking through there's not a huge number of male characters or like any other character. I mean, there's really only like a set of core characters that you see like throughout this entire thing. And like, that's true for like every movie, but I feel like this group of particular like important characters was rather small. And so it's sort of hard to draw a pool, I think, of like male characters in a role that would be significant enough to really put forward either a dominant or a submissive part in the story. Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble with that, I guess.
Well, then that's brings up a really good question too, because there was like obviously the hazing men that were a little bit more dominant towards all the people that were getting hazed, but the weird parts about this is like these girls go into the school. The parents went to the school too. Do they know that this is the kind of hazing that they're going to go under? Do they know that the kids are going to be eating the raw meat and having blood drenched all over them? Are they aware that these like things are going to come to the surface? I'm really curious. Like, did they know they were going to have these domineering figures like forcing them into these situations and partying and stuff?
I think so because there's a scene where the sister shows her the photo of their parents and says that's them right there in the photo with the white coats on, I think drenched in blood, if I'm not mistaken. So,
So is this an alternate
absolutely.
universe, like kind of almost like Lobster, I guess, in a way? Like this is just a normal thing that parents just send their kids off to blood tossing, eating raw, meat, crazy land? Like is that the normal coming of age of this world? Is that
Wasn't that the normal coming of age of most college students? I would think. I would honestly say that that's, maybe not for everyone, but it seems to be fairly in line, especially with like fraternities, right? Like you have legacies, you have dads who are like, no, boy, you've got to go to this fraternity, you've got to go to this college and this fraternity because that's where I went, and you're going to find out all this horrible shit that they're going to do to you, but I went through it too, so now it's your turn. Like I feel like that's pretty normal.
so did the parents then push them into doing their cannibal stuff in a way? Like, are they aware that was going to happen?
Well, that's kind of a question, right? I mean, that's really one sort of interesting thing that can be taken away from this is if, the parents are in this situation, the mother has this disease or whatever we want to call it, right? Like that perhaps came from eating a kidney or, however it's transmitted. And yeah, I mean, like they would obviously have known. And so like pushing a kid into that particular school to have those particular experiences would obviously raise the chances of having that particular outcome, So
I think that actually makes Noah's argument a little bit more accurate then.
It does.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm one could say I'm savoring this moment right now. Savoring it.
Savor it all you want.
I'm going to. A little bit of extra hair on that bitch. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, Jim. I really do love you. I apologize. I actually am making him nauseated. There is. I actually didn't even think of that. That's a good point. There's almost, I don't want to say it's like a fatalist component to this, but yeah, it's more like, hey, like this happened to us. Like you're up. Let's see what you make of it. But on the flip side of this, I'm going to fight myself here. Like, what else can they do but go, this is how we made it work. This was our world. Like, you clearly have the same thing going on with you. So let's put you in the same setting and hopefully you'll turn out in the way that we did, maybe? I don't know.
I did the opposite with my kid. So, I don't know. I'm not going to judge other parents. It's Mother's Day.
Well, then why did they raise their kids to be vegetarian? Why didn't they say, okay,
they were waiting for the right time, maybe. Maybe they were waiting for
maybe this vegetarian, then just shove them into blood buckets. Like that's crazy.
Well, maybe maybe just jump in. I'm not French. Oh. Maybe this is how I don't know how French people are, dude. Like, I'm just saying, like maybe
I would doubt that in France they're like, oh well, when we are cannibal French, we simply send our children off to school and let them teach them how to eat other people.
La fromage and le flèche.
I think that's how it works, and even in France or in Belgium, it doesn't. I would think that if they were trying to embrace the cannibalistic parts of themselves, then they would not have sent their children off to. They wouldn't have raised their children to be vegetarians, where they're always avoiding this desire.
Alex hit it. Alex hit it in the chat. He said. Okay. He said it's like teaching someone to swim by throwing them in a lake.
Oh, is that how you teach someone to swim?
That's how I was taught to swim. My grandfather chucked my ass in a pool. He was like, "Go," and I'm a fucking fantastic swimmer. So, I mean, there's something to be said for that. I mean, we laugh, but that's an interpretation. Like jump in.
I had a paddleboard, and I learned how to kick.
That's the equivalent to slowly being given like carcass meat from humans.
Yeah, they started me out with chicken nuggets. Now I'm on to that, really raw steak.
Gotcha. Yeah. God, I'm gonna DoorDash some shit after this. I'm fucking hungry. Anyway, but no, you're right. I'm joking, but you're right. The parents decide. It's a very odd thing. Maybe a criticism of this movie is the way the parents handled both. I mean, it's not just one kid that has this issue, it's two. And taking them to a vet school where they know the hazing ritual is going to include meat, the only thing we can consider is that they knew this was going to happen and wanted it to happen anyway, which is just a strange thing to do if you know your kids are going to be cannibals. What did you expect by the end? Of course, one of them is going to end up behind bars. You know, that was a little odd. But maybe the idea is you are quite literally on your own. Maybe it's the It Follows-esque sort of thing where, you know, the parents might as well be absent, right? I mean, they're absent and It Follows. And in that movie, you're forced to think about death and becoming an adult on your own. Like, this is your world now. You are not a child anymore. You're out there on your own. Maybe that's the same sort of thing here, that at a certain point, their guidance is bad, that you just got to jump in, you know?
Well,
I don't agree with that
right
style.
before she goes to college, they have the scene with the mashed potatoes, okay? And the mom sees that they've tainted the mashed potatoes, and you could tell that the girl didn't want to be confrontational, and she's like, oh, no. And the mom's like, no, what if you were allergic? Like, she was pretty pissed off. And then the next second she sends to Blood Bucket eat the raw meat land. Like, that's quite a leap in parenting
that's a good point.
styles. Like, I mean, maybe that's how some parents are, but that's quite a leap in parenting styles.
I really think it's like one of the big strengths that I really see from this, and like maybe this will be my point of disagreement, is that it's so utterly realistic to the experience of just kind of like getting out into the world that it's almost mundane, except for there's some cannibalism. And so I really do think that like this whole this kind of framework where your parents sort of push you out and they didn't explain this and they didn't explain that and they didn't try to teach you this thing and they didn't prepare you for this other thing. It's like, well, of course that's how it fucking worked out, because that's how it always works out. That's why parents push their kids into the same professions, into the same schools. You know, they teach them whatever it is that they learned when they were growing up with religion and, you know, all this other kind of stuff. And like, not to dive down into the whole like Catholic rabbit hole there about that, but it's kind of like, you go into this situation, you put your kids there, and you're like, well, maybe it'll work out for the best, even though you know it's not there. There's going to be some horrible things that happen, you know? So I really don't think it's like all that. I don't think it's all that surprising. I mean, like cannibalism. Okay, you got to think about this. Yes, it's about cannibalism. So we want to separate that and say, no, that's insane. That's crazy. That's an extraordinary circumstance. But for them, it's kind of not. You know what I mean? For like these parents, that's what they deal with every single day. And so I feel like after a couple of years, that's going to be fairly normalized for you. So it would probably just be like any other challenge that somebody would have to learn to surmount as they grow up. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm just not terribly surprised.
I don't know. I always found the idea that a parent is pushing his or her child into the same profession that the parent, the same profession as the parent is embracing a kind of sameness. It's trying to say, well, this worked out for me. Accountancy worked out for me. It'll work out for you too, young man. And in that sense, there's a sameness associated with it. And I don't know if lapsed Catholics would raise their children to be Catholic after the parents themselves had lapsed. In this sense, it does seem to be lending a little more credence to Noah's argument that they have embraced the cannibalism and that the solution that the father ends the film with is not a solution beyond cannibalism, but a solution like the one that he and his wife have found. I think stepping back from all of this, it's not terribly clear what these parents are expecting of the veterinary school, what their relationship is like, aside from, and in that sense, I think that might be a criticism of the film, because we're not given enough information to really understand how these characters are relating with each other.
I actually liked that sound effect. Criticism of the film.
Yeah, made you sound angry. I was half expecting you to just bite the camera or something.
He's letting his carnal stuff, take.
Yeah, embrace the carnality. Yeah. I agree with you. Part of the criticism I have of this movie is that I would have liked more. You'll never hear me saying this again. I would have liked more parent stuff in this movie. I would have liked that explored a little more. I think it would have I feel like other parts of this movie would have been a little more fleshed out. Jesus, that was an accidental pun. Like it would have been a little more, there would be more explanation. We wouldn't have, there'd be more to chew on. Jesus. Okay. There would be more. I actually, like, this is completely accidental, these puns. And they're you know how I know they're accidental? Like, how you need to know they're accidental is they're good. If they're bad, I wrote
And
them.
they're not in the intro.
And they're not in the intro or the exit. Good point. Good point. Good Lord. Anyway, I agree with you. I would have liked to have seen more parent stuff explored, especially since it seems so central to the story. These parents are sending their kids to the same school. Like, maybe we didn't need to know that, right? Like, maybe the movie would have been superior if we just would have seen them going off to vet school. We wouldn't have seen any parental background. We would have just seen Justine becoming this cannibal without the context
but she went
of her
to
family.
the same school.
Yeah.
She went to the same school as her older sister. But not only that, even when the hazing was just starting, the guy yelled down, all your parents want you to be here, right? You don't want to, make them mad at you. And it was almost implied that like all of these kids have been forced here by cannibal parents to like learn cannibalism. Maybe that's not it, but you know what I mean? Like it was like, whoa, what do you mean? Like all these kids are trying
but it was like,
to live
don't
up
let
to
down
their
your
parents' standards. That was like the reason why they were there, not to learn how to have a profession, not because they care about animals, not because of anything except for living up to your parents' standards. And that's why the hazing was so intense and so wild. It's like, you better do this or your parents are going to be very disappointed in you, and you better go all in with all the things that we tell you to do. That's a pretty intense world they're living in. But I guess that's the world a lot of us live in when we're trying to live up to our parents' standards and what they want for us. I was supposed to be a pastor's wife. I'm sure that's a disappointment. So,
Raw 2, the school. Yeah, I mean, I wonder. The whole backstory behind this. I think the film was trying to have this whammy ending with characters that it didn't develop well enough in order to make the whammy ending mark. And so we're left to speculate about whether or not the school is a cannibal cult, or whether or not the parents knew what was going to happen to them once they arrived. All of that speculation, because the film's not giving us enough information to really get a good interpretation out of that.
I actually want to see Raw 2, the pastor's wife now. I don't know why that's in my head. Like, come eat the flesh of Jesus. Yeah.
I could do a whole thing with the wine and some little crackers.
Mm-hmm. But the crackers are actually Caucasian people.
Yeah, it's skin that's been crackled over some fire.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's basically pork rinds, human pork rinds.
Yeah, I'm sorry. When we talk about cannibalism, it is hard for me to stay on topic and intellectual. I apologize. Continue. Sorry, Ben. I know you're going to say something very smart. Here I am talking about eating Caucasian flesh. Welcome to Deadly Analysis.
I actually was not going to say something very intelligent. I just wanted to point out the one scene where her sister, Justine's sister, took that video of her like trying to, or no. She was just the one doing it. Somebody else took the video, but they were at that party and Justine was like super wasted and her sister's dangling that like corpse, like arm, and she's like nipping at it. So what I really wonder about, like what I really ponder about here is like the reaction to that video, right? Because like back to what Jim was talking about, if this was a cannibal cult, like a lot of people were dealing with this as a result of eating these like weird rabbit kidneys and having the same disease, you would expect it to be like sort of like laughed off, you know what I mean? Like everyone to be like, that's kind of weird, that's kind of creepy, but I totally get it. On the other hand, I feel like that's the kind of thing that comes out and ruins someone's life. Or maybe, I don't know, like it's hard to decide like which way that ought to be interpreted in the context of this story, because it's not like people seem to really be shunning her for that reason afterward. You know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't seem like the teachers there, the professors, they didn't like try and kick her out. There wasn't this big recourse for like playing with like dead people. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird. Like the reaction to that coming out, like that video and that whole situation just seemed a little bit flat. It was a little bit suspect.
Well, there was the woman who she sat next to another female student, and the female student took one look at her and moved over a chair. So there was an attempt to say that she was being shunned as a result of this video. Moving over a chair doesn't get you outside the cannibal's teeth reach too far, but I think that scene was meant to show that she was a social pariah as a result of this video.
Okay. So I missed that just a little bit. All right, good. So that alleviates that a little bit. But there, okay. So like there is one other scene that I want to kind of like call back to, and I think this is infinitely more interesting. So toward the beginning of the film, they're in the lunchroom and they're talking about like AIDS or something like that, right? And I feel like this is kind of like a key scene to really sort of unlocking some other ideas that are happening here. And like they go on to say that this is a falsehood, right? But they were talking about the myth that AIDS started because somebody like had sex with a monkey or something like that. And so that leads into this sort of like pontification or like this discussion about the differences, the true significant differences between humans and other animals, right? And so I think that was incredibly interesting, and like something that we really haven't touched on yet is kind of like how this sort of escalation from no meat to some meat to like human meat might make sense to a person who was raised in a household, especially one that was particularly focused on like caring for non-human animals the same way that you would care for other humans. But it becomes sort of like this double-edged sword where humans are deserving or non-human animals and humans are deserving of the same sort of like care and respect and consideration, but also probably a food source as well. I don't know. It was kind of like a sort of like a weird tie in there, especially if we're thinking that cannibalism is kind of like a metaphor for sexual activity, right? So it all sort of like comes together, I think, in that one lunchroom scene. And I'm not fully sure how to like interpret all of that.
You're saying that because they were raised to like care about animals in this way, that like you might as well jump to like eating humans too? Is that the jump? Like, actually, that kind of messes my head up.
Well, again, like I'm trying to draw some context about these parent characters, right? So it's like you probably have to learn about them a little bit by understanding a little bit about Justine and like why Justine wants to be a vet. Apparently her parents are into this. Well, what kind of household was she raised in? What kind of mentality does she have towards living creatures? Obviously there's got to be a reason she was a vegetarian and like didn't want to eat animals, right? And it seems to be because she has the same consideration for them that she would have for humans. But if she breaks that taboo, then it brings down the walls for other things as well.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're laying down, and a lot of animal. I mean, this is the conversation where we need Garrett, right?
I was just thinking that actually.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have to do with me, who's a pescatarian. I'm on the spectrum, but not as far as Garrett, our vegan friend. But yeah, a lot of the animal rights activists and the philosophy behind becoming vegan has to do with animal sentience and animal like the fact that these are conscious creatures that we are literally killing for our sustenance, and to make the leap that humans are just another animal and therefore just another food source is not a terribly far ethical leap that some people choose to make. I mean, I know Ingrid Newkirk, who is or was the leader of PETA, has in her will that her body should be used in all of the ways that we currently use animal flesh in order to demonstrate the barbarity with which we treat animals. So, for example, if you have an elephant's leg for your umbrella stand, Ingrid Newkirk has suggested that her leg should be made into an umbrella stand when she dies, to attempt to make the intellectual connection between humans as being just another animal.
Like it reminds me of that billboard. PETA put up a billboard and it had a bunch of animals on it, and it read, "Where do you draw the line?" And then someone literally went and spray painted it between the cow and the horse and was like, right around here. And,
oh yeah.
And like, I guess that's what this, if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, that's what this is. It's like, if you do cross the line, does that mean it all goes out the window and you just, all of it?
I was wondering what that scene was about, and I'm really glad you brought that up. That was one of my questions, is it felt so out of place for me. I didn't know how to throw that in with the way I look at this movie. It just felt like a very odd conversation. It was fairly quick, but Now I really like this. I like the idea that it's not a large skip and a jump between this and that. I didn't see it that way, but I think now that you're talking, now that all of you are talking about it, that makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating.
Well,
There's
it is
something else there
odd.
too. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Are we going to keep talking about veganism, Ben?
I was about to diverge away from that, so maybe you
Okay.
should go first.
Yeah, just real quick. It is odd as a culture which animals we choose to eat and which animals we choose not to eat. We generally choose various species of fish, cows, chickens, and pigs. And we don't draw the line, as you were talking about that billboard, at horses or wild pigs or insects, at least in Western culture. Some other cultures have different dietary restrictions and different dietary requirements. But I think that it's interesting that we just choose three main animals that we raise for food and slaughter, and those distinctions seem very arbitrary, at least from a sort of bird's eye point of view. Bird's eye pun. All right, go ahead. Ben. Go ahead with
Yeah,
what.
no, sorry. Like I was struggling over here with my unmute. Yeah, it happens. No, that's fantastic. And I think like if you think about it like that too, from the cultural perspective, then you sort of like get into this world where the line gets drawn just based on what, like morality, like cultural morality. Is it really all that subjective, or is it, as I suspect in the Western world, more of an industrial question? It's like, well, these are the animals that were probably the most lucrative to produce in mass, so those are the ones that we eat. But just to go away from that just a little bit, yeah, that whole topic there, and I do really wish Garrett was here. But there's another element to that conversation that I think should be pulled out, and I don't think it's applied in the same way. But I do think if we're going to tie up cannibalism with kind of like a sexual sort of awakening for a person, there's that other bit in there where they're talking about having sex with a monkey or something like that. And so like obviously, that remains a taboo, and I think like that is a line that doesn't sort of like get broken explicitly in this movie, but it does give us a bridge between the two things. So just like with the meat, I think if we're thinking about this being a progression where she has progressively larger and larger and more dangerous game to pursue, where that leads in human sustenance, then we can kind of like think about the sexual thing the same way, where this isn't really like sex negative, to bring it back to that part of the conversation. It's more about, well, how extreme are you really going to go with it, right? So like we would say that sex itself isn't a negative. In fact, it's very positive, but it can lead to incredibly dangerous outcomes if you're not responsible, if you don't draw certain lines, if you go a little bit too far with it, it can kind of destroy your life, right? So anyway, yeah. The gradient applies similarly, I think, in both situations, whereas wherever we apply the line to what we will eat and what we won't eat, and then where we apply the line sexually to what rules we place around our behaviors in that part of our lives.
Yeah, there's a going too far element in this. That was part of the part here for me where I was trying to sort of line that up with where I'm at in here. Like, where does the film say going too far is, right? Like I talk about this idea that the movie is heavily transformative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's normative, that it's good, that it's positive. Like how far, I mean, and we're talking about cannibalism here. So even the first bite is taboo, right? But like what does the film say about too much, I guess? And maybe we look at Justine's sister as an example of this. She is, I believe, the person who chomps the leg, right? We want to use that as a phrase, chomps the leg, let's say.
Cleans the leg.
Cleans the leg, right? We talk about
I mean,
sweep
that
the
was
leg.
like some bones. Yeah. Like that was like it made me think of chicken wings. There's certain people that'll just munch on it and leave a lot of meat, and then there's those people that'll just and it's clean.
Yep. Yeah. That was Justine's sister. That is too much, maybe, in this movie. Like I feel like Justine's sister may be the example of excess. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Like, how do you guys throw her sister into this? To me, she is something like a representative of excess. Although, to be fair, I mean, I want to land there because she's the one who's knocking off cars to get the brain juice. Jesus. and to chomp the leg. She's the one doing all the heavy lifting as it turns into cannibalism. Where when we look at Justine, there's a struggle with her sister.
But
there's
she
not a struggle.
She cried.
Mhm.
That single tear, that's always a really. By the way, that's one of my favorite things that actors do when they just look like very plain faced and that single tear comes. I'm like, oh shit, that's the good shit. But yeah, she did the single tear phase. Oh,
It's always faked. People don't cry like that.
Nobody cries like that, but I love it.
Yeah.
It's so powerful in the storytelling,
Yeah, but it's fake. Like no actor is able to cry a single tear. No actor.
The best. All I'm gonna say, the best.
Fake.
Oh no! There is an actress. I have to argue that there was an actress, and one of my favorite lines she ever told a director. Okay, when they were like, I need you to cry for this scene," she said, "Which eye?" And that was like her fucking diva moment where she'd say which eye. And I don't know if it's true that she could just choose an eye. But
we're going to get Scott in here to do it. Jim is right. We're going to get Scott. We're going to bring him in, and I'm going to be like, turn your eye this way. No, actually, don't turn your eye. We want to see both eyes. Cry out of your right eye. I'm going to tell him. In fact, I'm going to text him right now. Be like, can you cry out of one eye? I'm going to do it right now.
Do that and let us know. Let us know what Scott has to say. Because I was an actor for 10 years, and it was never part of acting school to cry out of the left eye.
No, I think it was Joan Crawford who said that to the director. I could be wrong, but she was a diva bitch who was like, "Which eye?" Very.
I've got it right here. It's artificial tears, and if you want,
were you going to use this to make Noah feel pity?
Yes, I was going to cry out of one eye for him, and it was actually my eyes were dry. That's why I have it. But
oddly enough, that would have been one of my other kinks, crying out of one eye. Only if Jim does it. So yeah.
I can cry on cue, but I can't do it only out of one eye. That's when you have one tear going down and none of the eye area is fluffy at all. That is
transition, Jim. Growth. Yeah. That's what this movie is about. You'll get there.
Can we get you to do that? Okay. Just film that of you doing the single tear, and then we'll use that for every time we do our own little we're going to start doing our own little movie reviews, maybe do not spoilery things, and just each of us talking about our movies for 2 minutes. We can use you as like a thing about talking about sadness. We'll just intersperse this clip of you with your single tear.
Well, this will be that'll be our rating system. It'll be our one tear is bad, but if I get 4 tears, that's a recommend.
I feel like what we really need to go for is like figuring out the exercise that we can actually use to strengthen the muscle that allows you to cry. So you can be like, well, 1 inch stream of jet tears out of the eye, 2 inches stream of jet tears.
Not how it works.
All right. Well, I asked our friend Scott Clifton. Bold and Beautiful. Yes, who is the main guy on Bold. Or there's a bunch of main guys. He is one of the people on Bold and Beautiful. I think he plays Liam. I've asked him, and I said, this is very important. Stop everything you're doing and answer this question with no context. So we're going to know soon.
Okay, cool.
I don't know how we got on this. This is,
No, it's important.
Real quick, but
I think this was the most important diversion we've ever had on the show.
Yeah, Alexander calls it a top tier conversation. So thank you.
Oh my God, puns. Oh God.
So yeah, the sister is an interesting character. I do agree with you because the sister is the only one who gets any consequences associated with cannibalism. Justine actually ends up not fairly consequence free. Obviously, the mother, who's revealed to be a cannibal, consequence free, but her sister is put in prison. And not only that, if we're going to play out this metaphor of sex and sexuality as it relates to cannibalism, then her sister is also deemed to be the most promiscuous of the bunch because she's the one who says, there's one line where she says something similar to, I make out with guys and don't even she tells a story of I was making out with a guy and I didn't even realize that he had only one arm. So
we've all been there. I mean,
I mean,
I got you. Yeah.
She literally slept with the one-armed man from all of those films, The Bandits, The Bad Guys. But like, how
But
would you
she's
not
excess.
notice that? Like,
Well, that's it. That's the point. It's excess, right? It's someone who's so consumed by the thing in question that the movie is trying to get us to think about. I think that that we see too much of it, right? So we see someone who's so consumed by this she doesn't even notice the person has an arm. I like that. I like Jim's. I like this, right? Because there is maybe a warning. It's almost like, to me, the film gives you a warning of don't follow this too far. Like, if we take the way I'm looking at it, the way that this film seems almost heavy-handed in its metaphor for sexuality, it's almost like that journey inward. It can be all consuming, right? And what you find at the other end, like, it's almost like a middle ground. It's really just the confrontation to me about the things you're struggling with as you're burgeoning into a person, as you're burgeoning into your own sexuality. It's not so much about an answer to the question. It's not so much what you find on the other side. I guess that's what I was trying to maybe say, is that it's about the journey there. It's about the struggle, the fight, biting, looking in the mirror, autopsy, cutting, opening in, looking in the middle, seeing what's underneath. It's about conflict, right? But I think the film does give a warning of going too far one way. Excess. I think the sister is excess. That's how I like to look at this.
You know what's interesting about it is moderation is important, but we've also, if we actually look at a birth order, it, generally speaking, the eldest tends to have a lot more of the flubs and the trips and the things that pop up. But although they will try to, be responsible because they are the eldest, there's a lot of trips that happen being the eldest. I'm an eldest. So like there were a lot of things that I went through where I was able to go to my younger sisters and be like, hey, here's how to not trip over this problem. Let me try to help you not, go down this path. But maybe there's something to that because she is the older sister. She was there at the college first. The sister was trying to help her understand, like, oh, okay, look, mom and dad have been here too. Like, it's not that weird. This is just part of life. And was trying to help her younger sister. So it might have given the younger sister a leg up. And that might be part of the power of it, is like, hey, I got to help you through. Oh, you're going to be struggling the same way I do. I got to be there for you through this, even though, God damn, I wish you weren't struggling the way I was. Maybe it has to do with birth order too, not just representing excess, but the fact that you're usually hit the hardest with life first, and you can maybe help your siblings out. So, it looks like we got Scott answers.
Yeah, we do. We have
Scott answers.
We do. He said, I asked him the question, can you cry just from a single eye, like a single teardrop? Is that possible? And he said, yes, it's possible. And I've done it. He's done it. He's done it often, actually, he said on his show. And I said, I thought he was joking. So I said, are you serious? And he said, yes. Then he also said, it is possible to lactate only out of one nipple. So now I'm trying to see if he's being, like, if he's fucking with me. And right now he said, no, the tit thing is a joke, but you really can cry out of one eye. So when he comes onto our podcast, I am going to challenge him to cry a single teardrop out of one eye for Jim, because now I'm skeptical. I'm super skeptical, but he says apparently you really can.
Now the real question is, can he cry out of one eye and lactate out of one nipple at the same time?
That is third Emmy coming up for him if he can do that. Yeah.
Well, most of those are faked though. Like,
no, he says he can do. He says he can do it. So now I'm all right. All right, let's get. All right, we're gonna get this guy on here. Challenge accepted. All right.
I mean, I can cry, but only out of two eyes. I can't do one eye. It's upsetting. All right. Well, good. Maybe that's why Scott's
step up your tear game, Jim.
Yeah, that's why I didn't make it as an actor, and Scott did.
Now you know what you got to do, though. All you have to do is figure that out, and then boom, Bold and the Beautiful.
Definitely. Tell Scott to watch his back, because I'm coming for his part.
I am going to tell him that you are coming for his left teat right now. There we go.
Say that.
Yeah.
I was just kidding. I really was just kidding. I promise.
Yeah, no, he's blowing up my face. He swears up and down you can actually cry out of a single tear, one eye. You can make yourself do it if you're trained. Interesting.
Okay.
All right.
Wait. Here's the question though. We have to do the. I think it's Joan Crawford. I'm gonna give her that. She's the diva. Can he choose which eye? Let's see how.
Okay, so this is just becoming Deadly Analysis, the podcast of talking to Scott Clifton.
Yeah. This
is
is no.
actually
This is
talking about acting techniques. I think it's intriguing.
Jim. You don't understand. The question is, can one choose what their body is saying to them? It's deeper than that. Can they choose, or is it just a natural reflex to be the way one is, or can they go, you know what? I'm going to make myself do this thing that Jim Hunter says I can't do. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's a deeply philosophical question, Jim. You're not giving yourself enough credit here. Anyway, yeah, we'll see how this goes. I've no idea how to segue out of crying out of one eye and tit milking, but whatever.
We're ready for final thoughts.
Let's final thoughts. This was a potpourri podcast if there ever was one, all over the place. Do you want
me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I liked it. Overall, I'm giving it 3 stars out of 5. I think the metaphor is it could have been a little bit better for reasons that I articulated. I'm trying to take away my visceral reaction to the film. I think that it's a film about sexual awakening. I think it's a film about otherness in some ways. I think Noah has nailed how the film is also about a transformation and an awakening, and how terrifying that awakening can be. So I think it works largely on a metaphorical, or I think it works largely on a story level, but also to a lesser degree on a metaphorical level. All of the acting I think is fantastic. I especially like the main actors. Grants Maillet I have destroyed the pronunciation of your name. I apologize. And Ella Rumpf, who played Justine, and Alexia, her sister. I think they're fantastic in these roles. And so I like the movie. I don't think it hit me in quite the same way it did you, Noah, but I still would recommend it and give it a solid 3 out of 5. Who's next?
Sherry, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go. I'm a halvesies. 5 out of 10. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I think it really didn't hit me in the I'm gonna puke way. It didn't hit me in the way. It didn't really make me react in any of that. And I know we're not really just going off of that kind of stuff. The storyline is pretty good. There were a lot of questions I had though. The acting was fantastic. The world I don't quite understand, and I think that was part of the problem for me. I was kind of confused about the world building here. I don't know if this was supposed to be the reality we all live in or some other worlds. And so I guess that was kind of my issue. I don't think anybody else has to have that issue. You guys can go down your rabbit holes if that's what you're down for. But for me, I was like, what is this a dystopian like world, or like why is everybody doing this? Why is this something that's happening? And is cannibalism a hereditary trait? I think I was a little bit confused by the world building, but I understand the analogy, and that's kind of what made it awesome, and why it had redeeming value, because I do see the analogies that are being put forth. But yeah, I loved not just the dancing scene, because it did seem like what my teenager days were. Like I had been raised in this giant Christian bubble. I was only allowed to listen to Christian music. I was only allowed to watch Christian movies. I was just raised in this bubble. And then, Salt and Peppa came into my life, and, there's me singing in front of the mirror about shoop badoop badoop and like sex stuff that I don't even understand. And I'm dancing and singing to it. I don't even know what I'm singing about. I've never experienced these things. I don't understand them. I'm singing lyrics to songs that I really don't understand, especially when it came to some of the overtly sexual R&B hits of the 90s that I would sing along with. I had no idea what I was saying, but I did know how to move my body in a sexual way and move in front of the mirror. So it was like I was dancing to very sexual stuff, not understanding sex, and I felt that from that scene, and it seemed super real to me. Like I felt that, like I've experienced that, and So there were those powerful moments like that just kind of hit me like, oh, I'm glad I'm not a teenager anymore, and I understand parts of life. The last thing I want to say about this is there was some talk about adulthood being dark, and I did bring that up, but in a way that's what makes adulthood kind of cool. Like, you figured it out now. You've gotten past that really awkward stage, and it's like, yeah, it's fine. I get little chunks and we're fine and our sex life is interesting, whatever. Like, I don't know. It felt, I don't know if I agree with Noah that it's like positive, but it's not in my mind negative. I think it's just like an embracing of the weirdness of getting through our awkward teenage years and transitioning into adulthood. And nobody understands adulthood. Everybody's still trying to figure themselves out. I don't care if you're 55. You're like, I don't, am I an adult? I guess I pay my bills. So
I'm still trying to figure out what shoop de doop means. So I'm right there with you.
I don't know what that song means. So yeah. Yeah, it's awkward. It was an awkward sit through. I watched it again and it was awkward again. And I was watching it with other people and they were making these faces like, yeah, like those cringe faces. So maybe this was maybe we should have rated this on a cringe scale. I don't know.
Yeah, The Office being like a 10, Yeah. Interesting. Do you want me to go, Ben, or do you want to go?
Oh, no, I can go.
Okay.
You should definitely save yours for last and close up.
Cool.
Yeah, all right. So I think I enjoyed this more than either Jim or Shara. Maybe not as much as Noah, but I guess we'll see. Starting with the rating, I guess I'll just go ahead and throw a rating out there. I do think this was more like closer to a 4 out of 5, I think. Maybe even just a little bit higher, but it's not to nitpick too much. So let's just say 4 out of 5. That seems fine. One of the things that we didn't even talk about, I think, during this episode is just really the interesting camera work in a lot of ways. And there were some really great scenes that I think that they employed with Justine sort of like struggling. And a lot of times it was like when she was trying to sleep and the sheets were there, and there is different scenes of her like either, scratching or like awakening to this impulse, this urge that she has, or like there's even the sort of like the culmination of that where it looks like something is attacking her from above. And just the way that they shot that on like kind of like an even pane with the bed, with you're right there with her, felt incredibly personal. She felt like her soul is essentially like bared. I feel I don't know, like it was really interesting. Like the technique made that I think like emotionally like powerful. I don't know. And they've done this in a couple different scenes where just like the camera is super low. You're kind of like on more like a bed level or a knee level, and you're just sort of like looking across at what's going on. When she's kneeling at the fridge, whenever she's about to get her Brazilian, whenever the sheets thing is happening, just like the techniques there, I think were absolutely fantastic. And it's probably because that's not an angle maybe that's used a lot. It's obviously not like to the extent that like a Gaspar Noé does like just weird shit with the camera to make you feel disoriented. It's just like it's like slightly odd. I don't know. It's like a weird placing of the camera. I don't know. But I thought that was really interesting. So like there's technical merits to this film too that we really didn't touch on a lot. Like except for like maybe the music. Noah, you mentioned that there's like a transition there, and you can kind of get a sense of like the progression and the evolution of the film through the music, and that's really great. Yeah, I mean, just like the masterful use of metaphor just for its own sake, I think was really well done. Even if it was a little bit like blunt, I feel like it kind of had to be to sort of communicate the point, because yes, we want to see that the cannibalism can also be a placeholder for other things. It's interesting on and of its own, but there's other stuff that could be switched out for that. But if you go beyond that, even like maybe it's not just about sexuality, maybe it's not just about this or that. Well, it's really kind of like a prism through which you could see any number of impulses and evolutions and changes that are kind of like a really good fit for this story that I think we all share. And that's the other thing too, is that I think it's a story that is common among a lot of people. And so it should be easy to grasp and understand and sort of like empathize with what's going on in this movie. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's almost like mundane, the level at which this seems such like a normal experience, except for we're talking about cannibalism. So I think that's just, I don't know, that's really interesting. But to take that even one step further, I do think that it's archetypal almost at a Jungian level too, because like the real draw here and like the real end of the story is about understanding that shadow within yourself, understanding the inner darkness that you have, and then not really like fighting against that, not repressing it, not letting it take over, but understanding it's there and accepting it as a part of the comprehensive person that, you know, is on the inside. There's more than just on what's on the surface. There's more than the expectations that other people have of us. There's this other stuff that bubbles up too, and you have to learn how to deal with that. And so yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of really interesting things going on with this movie, and so that's why I have to give it at least a 4 out of 5. And I'm tempted to go even maybe like a 4.5, but bare minimum it's a 4, I guess, maybe just depending on the day. Yeah, so fantastic, highly recommended.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I like the idea that it's about accepting the thing within you and not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, it's a middle ground, I think, between. I don't want to paint the picture that this movie to me was about a totality of embracing who you are at the end. It's really about the struggle to get you there. And I think that's somewhat present in your analysis, but I like that. This movie really is a kind of middle ground. And I think it was meant to be a middle ground. Or was meant to convey a middle ground, but to take you to extremes, you know, virgin, vegetarian, meat eating, sexual cannibal on one end, and to see the struggle between those two polar opposites, and see what you find in the middle. One of the things I forgot to add is that Jim, really quickly, we talked about this very quickly, was about the idea of men being emasculated in this movie, and it's sort of a hyper feminist way to look at this movie. The women pee standing up in this movie. Remember that scene? There's something there.
Can I throw something out about that? I've actually attempted that with friends. Yes, alcohol was involved, and yes, I can aim really fucking far, and that is a thing that girls can do. And it's one of the things that when I watched the movie that felt kind of real, because some can and some can't, and it is. And she even said it's about pushing really hard and making the stream hard. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly the technique. And it was so funny to me because that is probably the most authentic part of the film. I know that sounds really stupid, but I was like, that's exactly how a girl can pee standing up.
No, I was going to ask for you to continue and say more about this deeply interesting issue. But you know, it is an example of two women peeing standing up, and we talked about the men in this movie being somewhat emasculated. So thought came to me, well, in the midst of you guys' closing out, I feel like there's something there. Maybe for another time. Look, I love this movie. That's why Justine is right there behind me. That's her. And to me, like, Justine is representative of something like coming to terms with that other side of you that's often hidden below, and that's fairly vague, but, you know, be it carnal, be it sinful, depraved, or just utterly wicked. Right. I'd like to think of Justine and really the mirror scene in which she's dancing and just moving her hips around in particular as an invitation to occasionally bring to the surface and maybe even embrace that one part of your nature that you usually try to keep down. Right. That is what I took from this movie. But that is also probably because that shit that's going on in my head. At least it was at the time I watched this. There was a lot of stuff going on. It's been in my world. Right. As a person, post deconversion, and so I'm primed to see maybe this movie that way. But I'd like to think that that's what it did for me. It made me think about those things. So I got to give it points for that. Look, basically what I'm getting at is join us at the next Deadly Analysis meetup. We'll be engaging in cannibalism, sodomy, acid, snuff, all of that. Embrace that side of yourself, guys. That's all I'm saying.
And
give into it. Yes, and pubic hair. Thank you, Jim.
Standing up. Yes.
Yes. We're just gonna go for it. Holy shit. I'd give this movie a 4.5 out of 5. Don't cross streams. That's what Byron said when you're peeing. Don't cross streams. Okay. All right. Well, this was a very interesting podcast tonight, people. I appreciate that. 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5 rather. This is one of my highest ratings just because I think it hits all of the, well, it doesn't hit all of it hits a good amount of the things that make me like a horror movie. It takes something pretty basic and simple, and it's even heavy-handed. Maybe even part of a criticism of this movie is that sexuality, and I think Ben hit this earlier, is that it's very, as a topic, is very blunt. It's very obvious, very overt. It's a body. It's two bodies. It's sexuality. It's very, it's very overt as a metaphor, and this film has it. But it's about a transition. It's about change. It's about the uncomfortability of moving from one side to another. and not even like just the transformation. So there's tons of horror movies that are like that. American Werewolf in London, we see a guy in one of the most horrific transitions. Whoops, sorry about that. I muted myself. I wouldn't classify a movie like that, like American Werewolf in London, where we see the fella transitioning into a werewolf, as the same sort of thing. This is more of an internal transition. There's external components, but it's an internal transition, right? And that's a scary thought in and of itself. But when you throw in the sort of subgenre of cannibalism and you sort of mask it, hide it, cloak it in that sort of subgenre, it just becomes an overall interesting film. Overall, very profane and vile film. I had no idea that songs like that one song that's going on when she's looking into the mirror, that's a real song that actually exists. I watched the music video for it and I was like, what the fuck am I watching? So I don't know. Like, there's something to be said for a little sympathy for the devil. So
can I tell you about that song from IMDb real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So this is from IMDb. In the scene where Justine dances in front of the mirror, she is listening to the gothic rock rap duo Ortiz. I may be mispronouncing it. Orties. A band made up of two sisters who often rap about men in the traditional way which male rappers talk about women.
Hashtag feminism.
Hashtag feminism. It's I found that to be a really interesting feminist reversal as you were bringing up that song and how that thematically fits with the rest of the film.
Can I just throw this out here? Like, I can't remember the name of the person who said it earlier in the thread. They were talking about how this storyline, they saw an interview about this movie, that the storyline was actually about how it's taboo for women to be sexual. And that was probably the underlying thing with the female sexuality, is that it's taboo for women to be sexual. You know, that's for guys to do. And there might have been like some flip reversals of those kinds of stereotypes to try to make things taboo. I do like the idea that it did something like that. So maybe that is actually, you just saying that makes me feel like that is probably accurate. It probably is about role reversals and the idea that it's taboo for women to like having sex and like having orgasms.
Well, it's the objectification too of the other sex, right? Because she says in the song, like, I like you when you're cold, like when you're cold and hard. Like there's a lot of like you're an object, right? Like you're a thing to me. It's very like, yeah. Oh man, we could talk about this for hours. Fuck. Like I didn't know that.
I've upgraded to a 6.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know.
You're upping your rating?
Yeah, I'm upping my rating to a 6. Adjust it. That shit's interesting.
Make the spreadsheet.
Yeah, mine's now a 12 out of 10. This one wins, Jim. Yeah, wow.
That's just what every girl wants. Oh, sorry.
yeah. Every girl wants a 12, guys. So, Jesus Christ, we have been all over the place. This has been a very fun podcast. So next week we're doing Cam with a cam girl. So one of Shayra's friends, hopefully, will be able to join us, who is a cam girl. And we're going to be doing the horror film Cam that I think came out 2018, which will be pretty interesting. So join us for that. I'm going to be on vacation, but my lovely co-host here will be taking over. And I think the week after that, we are doing A Clockwork Orange. And then I got to make the schedule. So if there's, like I said, if there's any other movies other than Martyrs that you would like us to do, Deadly Analysis folks, let us know. Let us know in chat. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It's great seeing you guys tonight. Byron, Alex, a whole bunch of other people tonight. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you guys next Sunday night when Game of Thrones is going. You know, plan that the right way, didn't I? That was my fault. Mother's Day, Game of Thrones. That's great, Noah. Good job. But anyway, yeah, join us next week for Cam. We will have a Cam girl. So there you go. Men, if you're watching. Women, if you're watching. We're going to go down a road we shouldn't go down. Join us next week. We'll see you guys for Cam. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.